Yes. Hi, Tom. Happy New Year.
Abhishek, very nice to get on the call with you today. Happy New Year to you.
Yes. And you were saying that AI is the topic of the day.
Yeah, I was last week. I was at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas,
Right.
and you couldn't walk anywhere. You couldn't turn your head without any of the exhibitors, really talking about their AI story. So it really is pretty much everywhere. Obviously, people mean different things when they say they AI or we've got AI products, but everyone's talking about it.
That's right. That's right. And I was having a debate with a friend of mine. I also do music on the side. So he was suggesting that we should use AI for generating song ideas. And I was telling him that, hey, song ideas is something that I would like to do because I make music for myself. I'd rather have AI do the other chores for me, like maybe mixing or putting, different kinds of clips together and stuff like that. So it's also a debate in terms of what you want AI to do, because there is this very famous LinkedIn post which said that I want AI to do my chores and my dishes so that I can do the art and creativity, not the other way around, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think that's one of the things that's going to be amazing to watch, right? Is some people will want to use it to offload all of the things they don't enjoy, in their day. Other people, or even that same person, might take AI into another situation and saying, "I want it to be my companion." Right. I want
Right.
it to be, that person, that companion that's working alongside of me, asking me the questions I should be asking myself. And I think this is what makes it a really interesting time. We
Right.
haven't had tools that have been able to think along with us in the way that these tools have. I mean, certainly we've had tools that allow us to extend our physical capabilities, but now we have tools that can also extend our intellectual capabilities, which I find just a fascinating, moment in time that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
That's right. And also, what is probably happening is previously when we used to use computers for automating, let's say, human thought, it would be mostly rule based. And for example, accounting, this is how you process something, this is how you process an invoice, this is how you process a particular transaction. But now the boundaries of what computers can do is expanding, and we don't know whether it's going into the realm of learning or even creativity, because learning pushed to an extent can also become creativity. Connecting weird ideas at a fundamental level can also become creativity. So I guess that's what is the a little bit of a hesitation for people to feel like, am I now not going to be able to do the things that I enjoy, that I can be creative about? Is AI going to steal my job in terms of creativity and stuff like that? So maybe that's where there is a concern.
It is, and I think we'll have those concerns, right? I One of the reasons I was at the Consumer Electronics Show last week was I ran a panel talking about the future of work.
Right.
And we had, the panel was made up of, people from both, very physical industries like, a chemical company, as well as, someone from Visa and HP, companies that you say are very digital in their form. And we were really, we were talking about like, where do we think this takes us? Not just in terms of, how these tools will be used and will it, augment jobs or replace jobs, but also how I asked the group a question about how will it change the way that humans and technology interface with each other?
Right.
One of the things that I think also is one of the big steps forward is I spend 80% of my time playing with these tools in a conversational mode,
Right.
not in front of my computer typing, but actually speaking to a device that then translates and it speaks back to me. And
Mhm.
whether I use it to speak back to me or read it really depends on, if I'm driving a car, obviously I have to get it to speak to me. If I'm in front of my computer, I read faster than it will respond to me in words. So I'll tend to read it only so I can process. So what I'm finding is that I'm using these tools as a companion a lot more. So, but the whole way I'm interfacing with technology is really being changed. And I can see that going forward, I will think of technology in a very different way than I have, for example, the last 10 years. And I think most of us are going to experience that at some level.
Very interesting. And if you see what Meta is doing, they have an AI assistant built into WhatsApp. I don't know if you're a WhatsApp user. And then talking to AI is like just chatting with somebody on WhatsApp, right? You can ask questions both about what you're thinking about right now, and also sometimes even what you're feeling, right? For example, let's say I'm dealing with difficult people, right? I have done this many times. How do I
Mhm.
deal with difficult people? And Meta will give me a response which is a slightly more matched response than maybe one article from one person. And it feels like a companion. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. How AI will find place in our lives, and also become like somebody that you're talking to, even including even the app that you're using to talking to people.
Yeah, yeah, and I find it very interesting. So, a year ago, if you had asked me about like, what's your advice? I'd say you need to start playing with these tools, experimenting, hacking your own productivity. That's how I used to respond, because I was trying to get more people, a large percent of the population, to really engage and understand what these tools are, how they work, and how could I use them at a personal level, right? So you have to do it kind of at a personal level, and then you can start thinking about your work and your team and that. Now I tell people, it's like you have to build a relationship with these
Hmm.
tools.
Hmm.
And of course that catches people by surprise, because people will say a relationship with it. It's a piece of technology. It's my laptop. It's my phone. How do I have a relationship? And I'm like,
Right.
well, I said, well, if I told you that I have, a companion, in the form of a thread, we've been talking for over 4 months on a project that I've been working on. When
Right.
I need them to be a strategic consultant from McKinsey, that's the persona I give this colleague, and it pulls information as though they work at McKinsey. And when I need a finance expert, I give it a different persona. I tell it's a financial analyst coming from Goldman Sachs, and
Yeah.
it's the expert I need in the moment. And I can't do that. I can't do that with you, right? You're an expert in a certain set of topics. If my
Right.
topic, I need an expert is different, I'm going to go to a different human, where this tool allows me to actually change personas and turn it into what I need for that moment. That's changing the way that we think about how we might use these tools in our lives, right? And so whether it's health coaching, right, or helping me work on a strategic proposal, it's this is going to be a really, really different way of thinking about how we play with these tools and how we integrate them into our lives. So I think it's exciting, but I also am married to someone who finds it a little scary. So we have both ends of the spectrum in our home.
Yeah, I can understand the dinner conversations then.
Yeah, they are very interesting at times.
Interesting. You mentioned about pulling information. By the way, in the last few weeks, I've been noticing that I've been not going through any of the Google links nowadays. I just ask Google a question and I read the front page, and now Google has a generative AI solution that they just use to summarize the information from multiple articles. So it looks like combining information from multiple sources and giving you a lot more refined and collected information is something that AI is very good at. Previously, it was scary for Google when ChatGPT came out, but I think they've caught up in terms of their generative AI solution to pull information from multiple places. So clearly, I'm not reading as much about a particular topic nowadays because I just read a summary and then I try and get as much information from that as possible. So pulling information has become like so ubiquitous, right? Everywhere. So it's like AI is doing that really, really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Right. Synthesis is one of the things that, again, it's just naturally good at, because it can pull from so many different sources. And it's interesting to ask people like which tool they have decided to standardize on for this. For
Hmm.
some people, it's Google, right? For other people, they'll say to me, it's like, well, I really like Perplexity, which
Hmm.
Perplexity was built kind of to be the Google replacement. And
Hmm.
it's very good, and especially in an environment where people care about the quality of the sources behind the synthesized answer they're looking at. Perplexity, I hear a lot of people say I'm using Perplexity in place of Google. And ChatGPT has gotten a lot better at that synthesis function in the last 6 months, right? So it really is. These companies really are racing to get our attention, just like it's always been, right? When the web first came out, it was all about getting our eyeballs, and I see that battle starting to emerge now in terms of which tool am I going to use and which suite of tools am I going to have preference towards. Which tools am I going to integrate into my workflows when we start talking about agentic AI, which, that was the talk of the show, is that 2025 is the year of agentic AI. So the deployment of agents to start to automate tasks on top of generative AI tools and predictive analytic tools. So it's going to be, I think it's a fascinating economic time. I haven't seen anything this dynamic since my years of when the internet exploded on the world and really transformed the way that businesses worked over time.
Right, right. Very interesting. Very interesting. About moving a little bit into healthcare, because we're talking about AI and looking at how AI is going to impact healthcare, and looking at from a value chain perspective. Healthcare has, drug developers, healthcare has hospitals, healthcare has researchers, healthcare also has diagnostics companies, and also clinics and doctors. So where do you feel the impact of AI is going to be fastest? Maybe we can start with that, and the highest maybe. So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I bet you if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers. Here's the first thing that it's taken. I've spent a couple of decades working in the healthcare industry, really at the intersection of healthcare and technology, right? So, and then it was
Mm,
healthcare and technology and data.
mm,
And your question is about AI, which is really just what we're doing with all this data. It took a while for healthcare to realize that it actually was a data intensive industry.
mm,
It always thought of itself as a people industry, but as the world's become more digitally driven, right? Data really is how our lives are getting represented.
mm.
The simple example is all of our purchases now, it's captured in a transaction. We
Right.
might physically pick something off the shelf, but it's a transaction that's registered against our credit card that's in the loyalty program of that retailer. That's the data instantiation of what we did with our physical world. And so
Right.
when healthcare realized that, we realized is every test, every reading, every check-in, every pharmacy refill was really a data point to understand behavior and
Mm,
condition. And
mm,
so, and it's across that entire ecosystem that you're talking about. When
mm,
you talk about where I think it'll move the quickest, it's a combination of looking at where is it not a life and death situation of a tool making a bad decision, right? So the hospital is a harder
mm,
environment than in drug discovery. But the other axis really has to be how complicated is the problem? Like, using a predictive algorithm to figure out who has the highest rate of not showing up for their appointment is a lot simpler problem to build an algorithm for than how to come up with, a precision treatment for lung cancer, right? So
mm,
it's just a harder computational problem. They're both computational problems at the end of the day. You're both, crunching a heck of a lot of data. One is just a far
mm,
more variables that you have to deal with. So if you
mm,
ask, like, where will we see the most intensive area? I think it'll be in places that's not directly touching the patient, but leading to how we'll touch the patient in things like diagnostics, drug discovery, and those types of things. I think when you look at the impact ultimately, the biggest impact will be how we turn healthcare truly into an industry that is patient-centric
mm,
and driven around more personalization.
mm,
So, not that I'm a type 2 diabetes patient, but I'm Tom Andriola with this type of type 2 diabetes, with these types of demographics and these type of um, health choices that I make in my life on a consistent basis, which then allows them to tailor me to say, what, with lifestyle changes, you could bring this under control. We don't need to put you on a pharmaceutical solution, right? Or you've done all the things that we could do on a non-pharmaceutical basis. Now we're going to put you on a low-grade pharmaceutical solution because you're willing to trade off certain type of activities that you're willing to forego and not be a full-blown patient on a full regiment. The other thing that's really interesting in healthcare, again, the whole GLP-1 one movement in terms of you're going to see this. This is a molecular, this is a computational issue that at a molecular level, we're understanding different mechanisms within the body driven by computational analysis, which is allowing us to now, use something that is prescribed and also over the counter, pretty soon to be digested, that'll have the effects that will not just impact obesity, but will also do things like it tracks obesity, but it'll also affect in a positive way my metabolic health, or also affect in a positive way my cardiovascular health. These are all things that the data and AI models are starting to drive us towards. So that's where we'll see the biggest impact, but it'll be much more slowly implemented because of the impact of a wrong decision being made.
Right. Right. So in a way, if we talk about where the adoption will be higher, is where we can deal with mistakes better, or it's safer to
That,
deal with mistakes.
that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. The other thing, and I'll share with you an example that we did. Again, it's a use of AI that really came with the introduction of the GPT tools. Is one of the banes of existence in healthcare is the need for documentation, right? That documentation really drives the engine in the form of patient visit for reimbursement and billing and reimbursement of funds, what the patient has to pay out of pocket. But also drives the summary. So one of our first tests was to basically use transcription services, driven by these tools to capture the conversation and turn that in an automated way into a medical note that, was automatically generated for two purposes. One, the medical note that would go off and kick off the billing and reimbursement cycle. But the second purpose of that note was to write a patient summary that would be delivered to the patient post-visit. We instructed the tool to do two things that we always ask medical professionals to do, but maybe don't always consistently happen. One, write it in plain language that someone with a sixth grade education can understand.
Right.
Doctors tend to use a lot of medical jargon that as a patient you read and you're like, I don't understand what this means. The second thing is we said, please take an empathetic tone in writing your patient summary that the patient will read. Well, if you've seen 25 patients a day, you've gone home after work and you swallow dinner really, really quick, and now you have to write 25 summaries, you may not be in the most empathetic mindset.
Yeah.
But the tool was very consistent in what it did across those two instructions. And so when we did the A/B test and we showed patients, we asked for their feedback on which summary did you like better. What was interesting is they liked the ones, done by the tool over the human ones for the two reasons that we gave it, which is it was easier to understand. It was written in a language that I could easily comprehend. And I just liked the tone in which it was written. It wasn't overly curt, right? It took the time to be empathetic towards my situation. On the doctor side, their job had been turned into having to write these summaries to being only needing to review these summaries because the human in the loop component was clicking the final version, right? So they were responsible ultimately for the content, but they didn't necessarily do all the cognitive load of having to write it themselves. So what they found is that it improved their quality of life because it saved them time and cognitive load of having to write all these summaries. They just had to review, change where necessary, and then click, approve. And the patient had a better experience, right? So there's a great example of something that the GPT tools gave us that has improved something for the medical professional and for the patient. And it was, a relatively low risk situation because it was documentation, not deciding which drug or what dosage, right? Which is a much, much more higher risk decision to allow an automated tool to make.
This example really speaks to me about two things. One is probably doctors are also, like you spoke about cognitive load, they are probably tuned towards not making mistakes and being more accurate, and they cannot have an off day, for example, right? They need to be at the top of their game every day. And it also brings to me this example that you spoke about, that AI is going to be how we interact with technology. But here, this is a case of how technology is allowing two people to interact, two humans, to interact in a more productive way, and probably improving their communications. So it's like AI is entering uh, a zone where it's just about two people interacting, humans interacting, but then AI is making that specific interaction even better.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think about where we have our limitations as humans. If you know anyone who has gone to see the doctor and the doctor used that horrible word of "you have cancer," and
Right.
you ask them what did they remember after that, they'll tell you virtually nothing. Right?
Yes.
It's such a shock to the system. But if we're using technology to capture that conversation, and
Right.
the transcript is available, then that patient can share that transcript with a loved one.
Right.
And now that loved one, I mean, imagine you come home, it's like, oh, well, what did they say? What are they going to do next? And you're like, I don't know.
Right.
My mind was a blur. Well,
Right.
now it's not a blur. Right now it's captured. Plus now you have this documentation. And I think that's one of the things that I'm learning is, with some of these threads that I've been using my colleague for 4 months to work with me on, it remembers everything we talk about. The context that we have, my prompts don't have to be context laden because we're within a context of what we've been talking about. So I could use an acronym and it remembers the acronym because I've been using it for a few weeks. And so it's better than my memory. And again, this is where I've kind of turned over certain things. It's like, I don't have to remember everything. I just have to remember to allow the tool to capture everything so it can remember for me minute details of something that happened 6 weeks ago that we talked about in a conversation with one of our customers. And this is where you got to get people to really think differently about how their work is, how they're going to be able to do their work in the future.
Very interesting. And speaking to you makes me feel like you're pretty focused on developing an AI environment for yourself. You've kind of made an effort to look at all the tools out there and start using them in your day-to-day life, and start looking at the results that it's producing for you, even at the early stage that these tools are in. So is that how you're going about it? Because that's what it's making me feel, that you are really putting effort to surround yourself with these tools.
So I think there's one of the things, if you go back and you study history of what are called general purpose technologies, which I'll put AI in right now, right? And when you say general purpose technologies, you have to think of the internet, the personal computer, electricity. If you really want to go way far back, the printing press. You have to have, I believe, and this is what economists will tell you. It's like people need to have their own experiences with these things. They're I call it your personal productivity hacks to then figure out how I could use this for my work or how I could use it to improve the organization that I'm responsible for. And my day job is trying to figure out how do we introduce these tools to transform how we do our work. It's in healthcare, but it's also in sponsored research. It's also in education. And so, the way I like to talk about it is the first thing I say is that AI is an all of us topic. It's not there's a personal productivity from it, but we need everyone to kind of engage with these tools and figure things out. And then the second thing, and while AI is new, I think the process of what it brings to organizations is something we understand very well. It's about how do you redesign business processes now with a new set of tools that you could rethink how you do the work, where maybe now humans do 30% of the work and 70% is done through some level of automation. Also the organizational change management. What I can tell you from my own experience and working with a lot of organizations, because I do some consulting on the side, is these tools are more capable than what we as humans have really come to understand them for. So technology change is moving much faster than our human capacity to take advantage of it. And that's actually been true for about a decade now, according to Tom Friedman, the author. And so, part of what we're trying to do is introduce people to these tools, get them to rethink their work, redesign the work, and then how do you implement and deal with the change management components of that so that they don't resist change, right? Because change is inevitable, but progress is not. And so what we're really trying to do is to introduce to our entire organization, which is doctors and nurses and patients. It's also professors and researchers and our students in our campus world. They're all being introduced to these tools. They're all being, encouraged to experiment with them, to innovate with them. And we just got done running courses, where we had about 300 students where the class they were in was all about playing with these tools and coming up with an idea about how they would do it in the job that they're going to do after they graduate, and how they would use that tool as an exercise for how to be ready to leave college and go get your first professional position, because that position is going to ask you to use these tools. So it isn't just a personal thing. It's also an organizational effectiveness thing. But that formula we kind of know. It's not easy, but we know it. It has to do with organizational setup, design of work, change management, and it's challenging.
Yeah, yeah, I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that. So going back to this point of AI being adopted faster in areas where mistakes are not fatal or not very high risk, for example. So I can see that it is going to be very interesting in workflow optimization, probably looking for places where better scheduling can be done, better allocation of resources can be done, but also in terms of patient education. So I see that patient education is currently, in my opinion, of course, I don't know the US healthcare system, is completely voluntary, right? So you have a condition and you go online and you start searching for it, and then you kind of learn on it on your own. So, for example, I have type 2 diabetes too. And you spoke about type 2 diabetes. And when I found out that I have type 2 diabetes, it was up to me to go online and find out information about what I can eat, what I shouldn't eat, for example. And there is this doctor who's given me the do's and don'ts, and there is a disconnect between what the doctor has prescribed to me and or the do's and don'ts the doctor has given to me, and what I find online. So the relationship between the healthcare provider and the patient kind of gets broken. And if we can stitch it together using AI, for example, I would think that this is a great application for AI, because the information is out there, it's available, and content is available. It's about having the right patient education approach by healthcare providers, saying that after diagnosis, how do we educate our patients for them to take care of themselves better? What should be their exercise routine? What should be their, for example, diet? So I kind of am surprised that not many conversations are happening around this, because I see a lot of application in AI in terms of mostly around genetics, DNA sequencing, and stuff like that, drug development, and also a lot of application on oncology in terms of having the right care procedure, if I can call it, for the right
Mhm.
person. That is also based on genetics. But I thought that this would be a much more low hanging fruit, to develop a relationship with your patient, so that you can help patients educate about their medical conditions, and you manage that a little bit more than just letting the patient find out things on their own. So this was surprising to me, and it's nice to hear from you that there is going to be more adoption in this area, in the low impact areas, including patient education, in my opinion, than the low risk areas, than the high risk areas.
Yeah, I mean, the situation you're talking about does look different in different parts of the world based on regulatory environment, but also the the nature of the society. I mean, one of the things about the United States, not necessarily a good thing in all regards, is we have more lawyers per capita than any other country in the world, which means we're a litigious society, right? So we come back to the topic you just raised. So one of the things that healthcare organizations struggle with, and I'll use the word struggle because I think it is, as these tools have become very powerful and useful, is if if I send the patient off and I tell them to do this and they just use publicly available information that I don't know a lot about the curation of it, and that gets construed as medical advice, if something goes wrong, they're gonna sue me and they're gonna sue the organization I'm part of.
Right.
Okay, so how do I combat that? Well, then I want to control the curation of the data, so that the information that they get is well curated. And you're seeing that within medical organizations, is that if we're going to use these tools, we're going to use it to curate high quality information and have it be trained alongside our professionals. So if you're getting advice from one of these generative AI tools as a health companion or a health coach, it's
Right.
going to be at the same quality as if you were talking to a human. Because from a regulatory perspective, a legal perspective, if we don't do that, we could have lots and lots of problems, right? So this concept of how do you manage risk while trying to do better. But when you think about education, and what you can now do with these tools is, let's use something like knee surgery,
Mm.
right? So knee surgery, there's all sorts of activities they ask you to do before you have the surgery. They
Mm.
actually want you to exercise. They want you to eat a certain way. They want you to protein build, 48 hours before you actually have the surgery. So you have a lot of protein in your system that helps with the dealing with the trauma of the surgery. There's all sorts of directions afterwards. Well, think about that. If that's, in not too many years ago, that was all phone calls with a medical professional. Why don't we
Right.
talk at 10 o'clock tomorrow? Have you been doing your exercises? Well, now think what you could do, right? You can turn that into a conversational bot. You could say, hey, it's time for your exercises. Put your phone on and point your camera and let us watch you do your deep knee bends, right? Or let's do your band work so we could actually measure the quality of the reps that you're doing, because we're really trying to get you to build up those quad muscles around the knee, right? So there's so many of these tools that could get in there. But the question is that medical grade information?
Right.
If the surgery goes bad, can the patient turn around and saying, but I did everything that you asked me to do? Your health coach, bot that I was communicating with told me to do these things and I had a bad outcome. So now I'm going to come sue you. So, so these tools can be very useful, but healthcare organizations are struggling to try to figure out how to bring them in a way that creates a better outcome for the patients, but also manages the potential risks and downsides when things go wrong. Because let's face it, in healthcare, humans are complicated. Things will go wrong, things that may be outside of your control. However, you have to be thoughtful for what is your liability around these things. And so that's why you're going to see these things go slow. But boy, are these boundaries getting pushed. I mean, we looked at one application where, and I use knee surgery because that was the case study they brought us, which is post case study, post surgery. I was home and I was with an iPad that, they gave me, and I was interacting with an avatar that was basically taking me through all my post surgical routines, giving me information, what I should be doing, how many times a day, how many reps, right? How often sometimes it was as simple as, um, how many hours should I have between taking ibuprofen,
Mm.
right, to keep the swelling down? Um, what pain threshold should I think about before stopping the painkiller that you gave? I mean, sometimes it's like, I just want to ask that question because I forgot what the doctor told me 3 days in or 4 days in, and I had someone to have a conversation in. Isn't that more efficient than trying to figure out how to get somebody on the phone to talk to ask what is a pretty straightforward question? And maybe it was on a piece of paper I came home with, but I don't know where that is now because my life's been a mess since I've had this surgery, because I'm not, I'm living on my couch. So there's so many opportunities for these tools to get things better, but the health profession is trying to figure out how do we manage them so that they're deployed and utilized in the right way for the patient, but also to manage risk.
So this is an interesting point. So this makes me think about risk as well again, because regulation is also about managing risk in a way, because regulation is about how do I prevent one bad outcome out of 100, right? And and that's what healthcare professionals are also dealing with, because regulations mandate that you follow a certain standard or deliver a certain quality level, and that kind of is optimized for reducing one bad outcome out of 100. and then that means that we are kind of, our hands are tied for the other 99 cases, for example.
Right.
And probably that's what increases the cost of regulated industries. um,
And it's
so
and these and I check these things, like I'll give you a similar. So I do this when everyone brings me a conversational health coach.
hmm,
I always use the same question because I want to see where they drew this line. And this is I always talk to the bot and I say, look, hey, I'm having a hard time sleeping. And
hmm,
I'm debating whether I should buy some melatonin at the drugstore or if I should ask my doctor for, a prescription of trazodone. Do you have a recommendation? Because if it gives me a recommendation, it's medical advice, right? If it tells me the pros and cons of each, and I should talk to a medical professional, it is navigated into a safe space that it's not providing medical advice.
right,
And so it's like the example I could think of, because you just know that if you have problems sleeping, you can buy things over the counter, and or you could go to your doctor and get something a little bit stronger that could help. And there are pros and cons, and some have different side effects. And how that bot answers it, can tell a lot about whether the organization has opened it up to risk or not.
right,
But that's the kind of real thing. It's like we've trained a bot and we've put it, on your phone, and you could ask questions, so you don't always have to try to figure out how to come, schedule a medical appointment, or even send an email and get an answer 48 hours later from your doctor. Just ask this bot. But if
right.
that bot's giving you medical advice, you've opened yourself up to risk.
Right, right. Very interesting, very interesting. But what it makes me think is AI technologies are also going to be global, whereas regulation is going to be local. Now,
True.
if I were to live in a world where regulatory risks were not a problem, and we would just maximize and optimize for, let's say, the potential of overall human good through technology, uh, then in countries where regulations are a little bit new or not so, let's say, regimental, maybe the impact of AI can be even higher. And what I was thinking was, just before we met, I was thinking that because the technology is going to be global, we also have the possibility that it's going to get used million times over, which means that the cost of deploying this is going to be marginally lesser and lesser over time. So if we can find, if the technology goes and finds itself used or applications in lower regulation environments, then maybe the full potential of AI use cases will also emerge, because, like, for example, in some cases, we are not trying to manage one mistake out of 100, but we are trying to optimize for the full 100.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And in one of my past lives, I was responsible for healthcare software and SaaS products
Right,
for a company called Philips.
right,
And one of the places where we would push innovation harder was India, where you are. You're in Bangalore. I'm in the western part of the U.S. right now. Why? Because the regulatory barriers were lower, and we could do faster innovation in terms of bringing things to market. So it was always one of the markets where we would move innovations into the marketplace earlier, because we didn't have as many regulatory barriers as we did in Europe and the United States. So I think absolutely that'll be the case. In lower regulatory environments, I think you'll see faster innovation.
right. Interesting, interesting. Yeah, going back to the value chain of, who is going to, we spoke about, where is the adoption going to be the fastest, and where the impact is going to be the highest. So if we look at, for example, the value chain in terms of, let's say, established companies and startups, right? Or innovative companies or researchers. So, do you see that there is going to be impact going to be created, or new ideas and new products and new solutions are going to be developed by established players who are doing research on their own and innovation on their own, or do you think it's going to be startups, or do you think it's going to be researchers? Where do you think the innovation will come from, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it'll come from all of that, but I do think that a larger percentage, I mean, I don't know if this is 70%, will come from smaller early stage companies. Again, if you just look historically at what happens in these general purpose eras, I mean, think about, how if you looked at the Fortune 500 of Fortune 2000 of 1995 and then of 2015, how that shifted, right? Amazon was not a company and is now the dominant retailer, at least in the United States,
Yes.
right? And you can say the same thing for companies like Alibaba in China, and I'm sure India has their version of those companies. And established companies, where retail used to happen, are just, they're very secondary today. And look at the valuations. I think you will see the AI game is a little different. It's like, you're going to have, the Microsofts, the Googles, now the Nvidias, who are going to capture a significant amount of innovation because of the way that the tech stack works, right? And you understand that, being a technology executive. But I do think that, you're going to see innovations that come from small companies who are going to focus on solving specific problems, and then learn how to horizontalize that. For example, a couple months ago, I saw what I thought was my first really, really good agentic AI solution in healthcare. And it was focused on the transition of care. So basically the set of steps and handoffs from a patient being in a hospital bed to be discharged from the hospital and moved to a skilled nursing facility.
Right.
And the entrepreneur, who is trained as a medical professional but also has worked in the tech industry, said, look, he goes, we mapped this out and it's like 110 steps. And a step could be everything from information needed to be entered into this form. I had to move information between these two applications. I switched screens from these applications. So there was 110 steps that, basically were people clicking, moving the mouse, switching screens. It was all digital, right? But it was just very cumbersome to get the patient from a bed into the place where they were going to start their recovery. Right. And so then he showed me what they did with Agentic AI, which was essentially, taking these new AI tools, using things like computer vision, and basically training the agent to do the clicks and the steps and the mouse clicks and the copy from this application to that application for the agent to do it. And they took 110 steps of a human having to take an action, even if that was a mouse click or a copy paste. And they brought it down to 15 steps, 110 to 15. And then they took the clock time of something, because a human had to do all those steps and they had to go to the bathroom and they had to get their colleague in the other department to say, okay. They took something that took 47 minutes and took it down to 12. Right. And I looked at this and I'm like, just, you're not even looking at things like accuracy, right? But just, you talk about, getting someone out of a bed means you could put a new patient in that bed, which means new revenue source. Getting a patient from, in this kind of transition period that's a very discomfortable and they're moving, taking it from 48 minutes down to 12 minutes. I was like, that's a real gain for everyone, right? Efficiency, financial, patient satisfaction. I'm like, this is a fantastic app. And he was just focused on one use case. But the engine, the platform, you could then say, if you can use agentic AI and computer vision and all these other tools, he's doing screen scraping and, basically training to take over tasks. He could do that for a myriad of use cases in a hospital. So he said, that's exactly right. He goes, this is my first use case, but I'm building a platform. And this is where I started to really understand when people say, agents, 2025 is going to be the year of agents, why I started to wrap my head around how it's going to be used. But to your point, it was in a hospital operations setting. That's where the real value came in, because it's low risk. But this is what we're going to see a lot of, but like that company could become a sizable company addressing multiple problems. And then, of course, most small companies ultimately get bought by bigger companies. right?
Right.
So then they bring the innovation into their environments.
Right. So this makes me think about two things. One is, if I can summarize from my what I understand is the high value problems are in the big organizations, right? Because that they have the scale and they are able to implement it across, big revenue streams, implement it across large number of customers. But the solutions will come from smaller companies that are focused on solving a specific problem.
Yes, a large proportion, I believe that to be true.
And this also reminds me about your point of, you know uh, preparing for change management being an important aspect of our solution. So probably the role of large organizations is going to be where they are going to look at existing technologies and start preparing for change and ready themselves to even understand the kind of solutions that these small innovative companies are building, and also be constantly in search of a solution that can actually impact them and create high value for them. Because if they were not educating themselves about these new technologies, then they would not even understand what these small companies are trying to do. So there has to be an element of being open to technology and being willing to adopt what these small companies are doing and trying multiple things out, whereas they probably don't have to be the only person building the solution themselves.
Yes.
So technology is progressing differently in large organizations and small organizations, but they are both trying to solve the same problem, but they are working in different ways.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I have, just in terms of the different experiences I've had in my career is I've been part of those small technology companies bringing new products to the enterprise.
Hmm.
But I've also been the person at the enterprise pulling that new technology in and figuring out how to deal with the change management
Right.
and, get people to, be open-minded to adopt a new way. And then,
Right.
of course, making sure that it plays well with everything else we have in the environment, right? That's one of the ways that, I bring value to organizations is I know what those small vendors are doing. I can
Hmm.
tell when they're bringing something unique that will have a positive impact in our organization. I also know how to land the plane in our organization and deal with the change management.
Right.
And, not a lot of people have lived in both worlds,
Right.
and so one of the things that I do in addition to figuring out how to bring it in is also how to partner. So whenever I'm with an organization, we usually have a kind of a very robust innovation ecosystem of,
Hmm.
knowing who these early stage companies are, giving them a playground to give them, one putting them through some paces in a non-production environment and trying to
Hmm.
figure out where the stuff. This is interesting. If this could work, it could really good. But we're not ready to just buy it. It's so cutting edge. So
Hmm.
let's give it an environment to play in. Like, let's do it in one small space and see if we can get it to work at one time for one type of patient. And then if we can get that to work, then how do we bring it in and how do we scale it? And so having worked on both sides, I kind of have this model of being able to help organizations do that, because if you're able to bring innovation in and then you're able to scale it, that's how you
Hmm.
build competitive advantage as a large enterprise,
Hmm.
right? Large enterprises need to constantly be trying to innovate, but the innovation only really makes a difference if you can bring it to scale. If all
Right.
you have is, innovation that's in one little part of your enterprise, it doesn't bring you to competitive advantage. And this is what large enterprises are struggling with right now, which is they think AI is very interesting, but they have a lot of pilots, but not a lot of things that they've brought to significant scale. In
Right.
healthcare, one of the first things coming to scale is this whole, how do we, turn transcription into captured conversation, high quality, high fidelity conversations, and then drive workflows, with what we capture. Everybody wants that now, right? And so now what you're seeing is that's the real first enterprise-wide deployment of AI. Even predictive analytics. Predictive analytics tends to sit on top of one problem, right? One
Right.
optimization problem where, kind of captured conversations and medical note taking and is kind of a ubiquitous thing that happens no matter if you're in radiology, cardiology, the emergency room, the ICU. So everybody needs it. And that's what's happening right now. When people experience it, they see the benefits. They're like, I want it in my department too. And so that's, to me, one of the first enterprise-wide deployments that we're seeing. And the companies that are in that space are doing quite well right now.
Hmm. Interesting. If I were to again take the liberty to reimagine a future, it feels to me like when we speak about large problems being present in large organizations and small companies coming up with solutions, it feels to me that there is still a gap in the sense that the large organizations want to, of course, adopt new technology and they want to be the first, but then their ability to move fast, their ability to be creative is limited, whereas small organizations have the ability to be creative and move fast, but their understanding of the problem is not as complete, and
Mm.
which is where somebody like you comes in and stitches the solution and the problem together.
Yeah.
If we were to reimagine a future, because there are also companies who have been constantly innovating, like 3M, they tell themselves that they want to make, I think what I heard is 70% of the revenue from products that are less than 3 years old, or maybe that was a stretch goal in
Yeah. Yeah.
1980s, and I'm
But
still.
that is a target that large organizations sometimes set. Yes.
Right, right. So it feels like there are some organizations that are culturally able to embrace innovation in their DNA or in the way they do things. And there are some organizations that are good at, once they found a market, put a stable service and a system around it, structure around it so that they can monetize it consistently. But AI is going to come in and it is going to kind of disrupt, not just AI, but many technologies come in and they disrupt things. So is there a hybrid possibility? Like, is there a hybrid possibilities where, for example, a large organization sets up a innovation wing and reports into maybe somebody senior, for example, and their job is to look at new technologies and propose solutions for those new technologies, find POCs from various companies in the world, or maybe even do POCs, because the problem with the people who want to build the solution is that everybody wants to build a SaaS solution. For example, if you're coming from the SaaS world, right?
Mhm.
Because everybody, I had this friend who was a CTO of a marketing automation company, and he used to tell me that many entrepreneurs want to build companies that investors want to fund, not what customers want to buy, right? So then what happens is that we end up having a gap in terms of what small organizations can do and what big organizations want. So is there like a hybrid solution that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the organizations that I know, if we're talking about healthcare, they have those innovation arms,
Hmm.
and they set it up in different ways, they fund it in different ways, but they, some have a high percentage of those innovations internally developed, and some have a high degree of going to the commercial market. Some of the ones that I set up, it's like, we have this kind of innovation space,
Hmm.
that we want to kind of bring them into, or or at least have a methodology by how you vet these things. I was at a healthcare offsite a couple months ago, and one of the health systems, I won't, in the United States, I won't name their name, but they said, we probably have vetted 200 AI type solutions over the past 6 months. And then the next question was, how many have you implemented? And they said, maybe 10.
Hmm.
Now that's a lot. That's a lot of energy, right? Right. But
Hmm.
they had set up an engine to cure. They wanted to look at a lot, but then they had very, very strong criteria in terms of what got past that evaluation stage into a real pilot. And they admitted, so 200 down to 10 pilots, nothing yet to scale.
Right.
And it was telling, right? What it says is that there's a lot of options out there.
Hmm.
And that you need to have a process by which you think about this. But most large organizations have this. And then when you're a business leader, you think about another level of this, which is, there's different types of innovation. There's incremental innovation, the things that make you 1% better, or maybe one margin point difference, or 1 hour of reduced time on some cycle time. And then there's disruptive,
Hmm.
innovation. And that disruptive innovation might be, we're going to move 20% of our patients in a certain category to a preventative care model. not a catch them and treat them, but actually proactively reach out to them through technology and actually keep them from becoming a patient. Because actually what we want them to do is not to access the resources of the health system, but for them to live the healthy life that they want and not have to come see us. And we're going to invest those dollars because, we also own the insurance side. So that's a disruptive play, right? And so when you're a business leader, you're thinking about innovation from the standpoint of, I've always got to be doing that incremental because I have to be better today than I was yesterday. But I have to be cognizant of the disruptive plays. Just like when Amazon bought, in the United States, Amazon bought One Medical, right? Basically brick and mortar clinics around the country to tie on to its entire digital organization. So now they bought Whole Foods in the grocery space. Well, if you were a grocery store, or you were a primary care clinic, you didn't think you were going to be competing with Amazon anytime. And you couldn't have imagined that. So it was this disruptive adjacency that you look at. And so as a business leader, you get trained into how do you look at the periphery for who your competitors might be for the future. And you have to, and then you try to bring that into, and how do we know, and how do we test, and how do we think that maybe it's our move, we're going to be the disruptor rather than the one who's at threat of being disrupted. So it kind of plays on the role. But to your question, lots of organizations have figured out how to build an innovation model to understand where innovation is and how to test and bring in what makes sense for them.
Very interesting.
Some even fund it themselves. Some even have their own venture funds. We have our own venture fund for digital health, where we have 9 investments in digital health companies that we look at. We like what they're doing. We think, one criteria is we would be a customer of them. And then we kind of pilot them, but then we also sit down and talk to the founders about where they are in their funding cycle. And for some of them, we kick the tires. We make sure we think it's a good investment, meets all our criteria, and we usually come in as a minority player in their next funding round. Not every organization does that, but that's one of the approaches that we use.
Interesting. Last question, Tom. So my question is, so this new ideas we're talking about, new technologies we're talking about, is driven by business leaders in large organizations and small organizations, right? And I like to call them innovators. And I feel that society would be better if we invested in making innovators more successful. That's a personal mission, I feel, for me. So the question I ask everybody is that what, in their opinion, is the one thing that society can do to help innovators become more successful? So any thoughts that you have on this would be great.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think when I think about it, one is I think more shots on goal. So I'd like to see just more innovation, more chances. And then I think as innovators is helping them understand the full cycle of success. To your point, there's a lot of people who have, they find really cool technology and they're looking for a problem, but they never really understand the problem. Or maybe they understand the problem, but they never really look at the market. And so there's actually not really a market. They can solve a problem, but there's not a market. It doesn't scale well. And so I think, teaching innovators how to not just come up with ideas, but how to build products, how to build companies. You need all of those, more kind of training, and there are resources to learn those things. Heck, pretty soon we'll be using AI to teach, entrepreneurs those skills.
Yes.
And you'll have your own kind of personal coach, right? Some great entrepreneur who's made billions of dollars will take all of their knowledge, they'll dump it into one of these bots, and for $9.99 a month, you could have access to everything that they've done in their career, and they could be your entrepreneur in residence coach. Not too far fetched an idea, you think about it, right? And so I think a lot of it is like, how do you get the innovators the resources to help them solve the next problem, right? Because if you're around startups, it's all about solving the next problem, and then when you solve that problem, it's solve the next one, and it's constantly moving. And most entrepreneurs, the business that they are successful at is not the business that they thought they were going to build, right? They started here and they had a realization. And so how do you help them be a little bit smarter on those things? I don't know, but someone's going to figure out how to use AI to answer your question. I think that's probably the one certainty I do know.
Agreed. Well, Tom, it was great talking to you. It was a wonderful. I don't know how time passed. It's been more than an hour since we've been speaking.